In the play that is Italy's story of the 20th century, there are two chapters of such significance that they are known beyond the boundaries of the Italian social and cultural sphere. Its descent into barbarism, followed by the fall of the barbarians. And on the stage at the beginning of the first act, there is a sequence of events that fascinates me as it speaks volumes of the nature of fascistic political movements. As children, we spend hours in our schools being taught about the rise of Nazism in Germany, but I believe there is more to be learned on how a civilized people turn into savages by watching the curtains open to reveal the stage of Italy during the 1920s. If it were a play to be shown in theatres, its title ought to be Meno Frego. The leading roles in this act are Benito Mussolini, Giacomo Matteotti, Giovanni Amendola, Ferruccio Gingalia, and a black faceless mass. Not faceless because they have no faces, but faceless because of their uniformity in mind, appearance and behavior. The curtain to the stage opens to reveal a dead man lying on an Italian street, a bullet wound to his head. It is the body of Ferruccio, a leading figure of the Italian communists. Before the body stands the Black Mass, having just committed that murder, and in line with Mussolini, accused and condemned by all for this murder. And, confronted with all of this, they simply respond with Meno Frego. It is 1922, after the March on Rome. The communists have been silenced and murdered, and Mussolini is prime minister. And amongst the few left opposing him is now Giacomo Matteotti, the leader of the Italian socialists, who does so loudly in hope of saving Italy from doom, pointing out the vile brutality with which Mussolini's Black Mass acts. However, his concerns are repeatedly answered with a Meno Frego by those who he accuses. In the next act of the play, the curtain opens to show us the corpse of Giacomo, who has been tied up, driven into a forest in the outskirts of Rome, stabbed in the stomach several times and left in the forest to bleed to death. Next to his body we find again the Black Mass, having just committed the murder in league with Mussolini, and people fume and scream at them, again in outrage over this disgusting act, to which the Black Mass responds with Meno Frego. The socialists are dead and crushed, and now stands Giovanni Amendola, the leader of the Italian liberals, who publishes piece after piece and speech after speech condemning the deeds of Mussolini and his black uniform faceless mass, beseeching the public to take a stand against the Black Mass and its leader Mussolini. The curtain opens to the next scene. Giovanni Amendola's battered and bloodied body lies in his office. People call for the Black Mass and Mussolini to be held to account. Mussolini walks into the Italian parliament, takes the speaker's podium, and as people call for him to be held to account, or at the very least questioned, over all the violence and bloodshed inflicted by the Black Mass, he opens his mouth. The crowd of accusers goes silent, and he says, "Yes, I did it." And the crowd simply responds with Meno Frego, as a Black Mass engulfs them all. And it is like this that events transpired in Italy during the 1920s. It is one of the few occasions where reading a history book feels like reading a piece of literature. It's almost like a plot that could have just as well been written to a play on the stage by Bertolt Brecht, or as a novel to warn society by George Orwell, or as a short story written in defiance by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Meno Frego is Italian and means "I don't give a damn." But it is far more than just an Italian figure of speech. It was also the motto of the Black Shirts, the Black Mass of uniformed Italian thugs that roamed the streets of Italy in a murderous rage. The murders of Giovanni Amendola, Giacomo Matteotti, and countless others did happen. The leader of the liberals, Giovanni Amendola, was beaten into a bloody pulp in 1925 and died of his injuries in French exile a year later. And throughout these years from 1922 to 1925, when violence gripped the streets of Italy and fascist crooks and gangs were murdering everyone to the left of Mussolini all across the country, there was outrage and calls for those who did these crimes to be held to account. But when Mussolini walked into Parliament on the 3rd of January 1925 and gave a speech in which he announced that he was responsible for all of this, he was not taken out of power, he was never held to account, he wasn't driven away by those parliamentarians that had previously called for him to be held to account. Instead, they gave him full dictatorial powers, and he became dictator of Italy that day. The 3rd of January 1925 is marked in the history books as the day that Italian democracy ended. The phrase Meno Frego had its desired effect. For years, Italian society was subjected to the most gruesome political violence. But the attitude chosen by those who inflicted it over the years conditioned society to just accept it for what it is. And over time, more and more people just gradually started accepting the violence. It's just the fascists. Of course they're violent. What did you expect? They don't give a damn. The massive violence was in the end no longer called out, and nobody held those responsible to account because the public simply accepted that it was part of the dish that came with fascism, and that they would continue murdering people no matter how many and how often would tell them that they are amoral, despicable, and vile. So in the end, the remaining parliamentarians, the king and the public, simply didn't give a damn anymore, and accepted their thuggish rulers simply because they were thugs who kept getting away with it. So the violence was called out, it was condemned, but because the thugs kept engaging in violence, and because of that, people simply adopted it to be the new social reality. Many have probably at one point in their lives read or heard that famous poem by the German pastor Martin Niemöller called "And Next Day Came For." As important as the lessons to be learned from that may be, I find the lessons to be learned from Mussolini's rise to power to be far more important, because people did speak up, but the conditioning into accepting violence won in the end. It is Mussolini's rise to power that I believe is the most important topic to learn about to understand fascism, and not the Second World War itself, especially Italian fascism, because it didn't gain power through infiltration of institutions like in Japan, or through a swift and brutal government takeover as in Germany, or through a national bloodletting like in Spain, but through the slow, gradual conditioning of the Italian people into accepting the unacceptable, into gradually accepting murder as just another means of politics, into willingly ignoring obvious wrongs, and into abandoning the normal rules and guidelines that keep a civilization from falling into an abyss. Fascism is revealed through this to be fundamentally anti-everything and anti-everyone else. The rules and procedures of a parliament, its laws and its constitution, are not guiding principles to be safeguarded to ensure the same liberties for all in a common contract, but to the fascist nothing else but a tool to be maneuvered around and with which to demolish those who stand in the way of fascism by all means possible. Standards are there to be enforced upon you, but not upon me, the fascist. I, the fascist, have a sacred mission, and your principles, they are nothing but mere constitution that stands in the way of the greater good for which I am willing to sacrifice the blood of the impure. And if you try to hold me to account to the standards of mere constitution, my response is a simple meno frego. But more than just my response, my goal is to get you to respond with meno frego when you see me do harm to others. For me to succeed on my sacred mission, I do not need you to jump aboard and sign up to fight for my secret mission. I just need to condition you into no longer standing in my way. And when, on such a sacred mission, the values that hold a society together are nothing but a hindrance standing in the way of the final solution. I disagree with you, but would fight for your right to do so turns into I disagree with you and I will destroy you by all means necessary, no matter the cost. And this mode of engagement and behavior is not merely a chapter in a history book, let alone a historical anecdote. It is also not just bad behavior. It is a modus operandi. It is a means of engagement so deeply ingrained within the fascist ideology that it has become and will always remain the only means by which people of that faith engage with the non-believers. And it also teaches the valuable lesson that if you do not stand up to a threat to someone else's liberty, you will in the end not only lose your own, but you will be conditioned into accepting that your liberties and rights are now gone. I visited the concentration camp Mauthausen at its memorial garden in November 2017, before I was driven off the internet by people who didn't want me to make videos like this one. In 1943, Mussolini's government collapsed after a series of embarrassing defeats by the Italian army and navy to the Allied forces. After the collapse and the surrender of Italy, the Germans, previously proclaiming to be allies of Italy, swiftly invaded and occupied Italy and subjected it and its people to a brutal occupation, during which all those who resisted this foreign fascist occupation were deported to Mauthausen, the camp that I visited. Italian Jews were mainly deported to Auschwitz, but other Italians, priests, cobblers, tailors, army officers, politicians, laborers, and everyday people whose crime it was to oppose German occupation were brought to this place in northern Austria and murdered. Within this memorial garden stands a marble block with the pictures and names of women and men who died here and came to this place from Italy. Within the vast network of camps, Mauthausen was the camp where Italians were murdered, and where to this day Italian schoolchildren go when they learn about the darkest chapter in the Italian history book, There is a weird twist in the Italian story during World War II. Italy entered the war as an Axis power. However, when you read the history books, Italy is on occasion almost depicted as a victim of the war. The reason for that is the extraordinarily vicious brutality of the German occupation after 1943. Entire villages were brutally slaughtered and burnt to the ground by SS troops. The Butcher of Rome massacred hundreds in the caves in the surrounding hills. A vicious Gestapo and SS network was established throughout Italy and organized through its notorious commander in Rome. Before the German occupation, an entire generation of young Italian men was sent into certain death to die in the Libyan and Egyptian deserts, to suffer and die in the hills and mountains of Albania and Greece, to freeze in the outskirts of Stalingrad, and to drown with the Italian Navy in the Mediterranean. The war and occupation itself resulted in utter misery for the Italian people, as they had to live through one of Europe's coldest winters amongst mud and ruins, whilst the Germans ruthlessly, in a scorched earth policy during their retreat, destroyed the Italian infrastructure needed for a functioning society, as they would rather see Italy in ruins than have the Allies use it as a base. And then, of course, the destruction of the Italian Jewish community and the thousands of Italians deported into camps to be murdered all across Europe. It is where not giving a damn will lead you, becoming victim of the very forces you thereby help to unleash. This pattern of behavior, which led Italy into this situation in the first place, the aggressive violation of all principles and rules guiding a society for the purpose of forcing themselves into power and conditioning you into accepting their means and tactics as the new normality, is still alive and ongoing today, applied by the people promoting the same doctrines. I believe it to be a myth that most of us and most of you wouldn't stand up to injustices committed against others. But it is a state of mind that those who wish to take our rights and liberties from us wish for us to have, and which they intend to condition us into. Whatever segment of society, social life or media they target, getting you into simply accepting their blatant violations of common rule and principle as the new normal is a means of engagement that you will find used against you. Be aware of that when you encounter those who wish to force upon you to accept what you would usually deem as unacceptable.